Good morning and welcome to Differentiation. In this professional development, we will spend time talking about a common language for differentiation and what it looks like to implement and use with our students. As we know, we start every presentation with grounding it in our goal of moving to the next level. For this presentation, we will focus on rigorous early elementary education, which we know all of our students can achieve. Differentiation is just one tool that will help us get to this goal. We would also like to take a moment and connect the work of this PD to the 5 goals of Buffalo Public Schools, which we will achieve by 2025. For this professional development, goals 1 and 2 most clearly align to this PD. Goals 1 and 2 state that we will eliminate achievement and opportunity gaps and also provide access to educational excellence and accelerated learning. And finally, our work in differentiation is very grounded in the work of the Student Success Plan. This theory of action holds that if we want our students to be prepared, that we have to ensure that they have a welcoming and affirming environment, that we hold high expectations for all students, provide rigorous instruction and inclusive curriculum and assessments, and also provide ongoing professional learning opportunities to prepare all staff to support students. So today in this presentation of differentiation, we will address each one of those components of the Student Success Plan. As briefly stated in the first slide, our objectives are to develop a common understanding of the district's framework for differentiation and also be able to differentiate effectively to support student success. Our agenda for today will begin with defining and creating a common understanding of what differentiation is. We will spend some time talking about how to differentiate through the content, the process, and the product. Briefly, we will touch upon differentiating through the environment. We will move into Tier 1 and Tier 2 and 3 blocks to support student learning and what that will look like when we are differentiating. We will finally move into the coaching tool and the look-fors and how to monitor and support differentiation in your classroom. The next few slides will begin to discuss our common understanding for differentiation. Before we do, it is important to note that we are using and implementing differentiation so that all of our students have access to grade level content and material. As we know, saying it may not be enough for some students. As a result, this slide below will give a graphic of other ways that we could teach our content. We may have to say it through multiple modes, show it through various ways, or even model it so that our students are able to reach the learning targets and learning goals of their grade level. Differentiation is a framework used to help students gain access to grade appropriate, standards aligned instruction. When we differentiate, all students are exposed to the key concepts of that grade level, but maybe at differing levels of complexity. All of the instructional decisions that we make are based on data. This data might be different for different kids. For example, informal versus formal, or qualitative versus quantitative, but nevertheless, we are using data to inform our instructional decisions. Differentiation is culturally and linguistically responsive, and we will provide scaffolds as needed when we are differentiating. On the opposite column, you will see what differentiation is not. Differentiation is not necessarily individualized instruction, although working one-on-one with a student may be used to support the learning of students. In isolation on its own, it cannot be described as differentiation, but when it is intentional and based on student need, It can be. Differentiation is not lowering the standards. All students should have access to grade level curriculum and materials. And lastly, differentiation is not RTI or AIS. RTI and AIS take place outside of the core block and is used as a time during the day to address any gaps the students may have based on data. As we continue to define and create a common framework for differentiation, here are some of the principles that will guide us. Differentiation takes place during our core instruction. It does not have to only take place when you have a smaller group or RTI or AIS, but it can also take place during core instruction. All students are engaged in meaningful work. The data will drive our instructional decisions. Our group should be flexible. The sources of information will come in varying formats. And support will look different for different students and even in different classrooms. We will absolutely go into the 4 ways to differentiate according to Carol Tomlinson. In her work in differentiation, she discusses the content, the process, the product, and the environment as 4 modes to differentiate in your classroom. Carol Tomlinson, in her work on differentiation, notes 4 ways that we can differentiate in our classrooms. We can differentiate through the content, the process, the product, and the environment. The content is the knowledge and skills students need to master. So when we differentiate through the content, we are adapting the information and the ideas students need to grapple with in order to reach their learning goals. This might mean we are adapting the content to student interests, their academic readiness, their language proficiencies, or most importantly, we are providing or using scaffolds that will be temporarily used to help students reach these learning goals. Process is going to be all of the activities that students use to master the content. So differentiating through the process is adapting what students use in order to successfully take in and make sense of the content. When we differentiate through the process, we may use manipulatives, we may use tools, we may chunk instructions, and several more ideas. The product. The product is going to be the method that students use to demonstrate their learning. So when we differentiate through the product, we are adapting how students show you what they know, understand, and can do. This might mean using videos or photos, oral presentations, graphic organizers, projects, or written responses. And lastly, the environment. The environment is going to be the organization and atmosphere of the classroom. So when we differentiate through the environment, we are changing where students are working or who they are working with. So this may include partner work versus individual work, or working with another staff member, or even at a different location. When we adjust the content, everyone is working towards the same standard, but may get there a little differently. Some students may trace, while others practice independently. We might provide graphic organizers for some. We may provide glossaries or pre-teach vocabulary words. We may reteach a lesson in a different way. We may also use sentence starters or sentence frames. And of course, this is when the use of scaffolds will be the most commonly used as a way or method to differentiate the content. The use of sentence starters and sentence frames is a way to adjust the content. Students may need a sentence starter to start when answering a constructed response or some sort of written response to a math activity or math problem completed. Providing the sentence starters or sentence frame will provide those students who need it with an access point to answering the question. Over time, these sentence starters and sentence frames can be and should be removed so that students gain independence to completing this process without the assistance or help of a sentence starter or sentence frame. The use of scaffolds are very common when differentiating the content. Scaffolding bridges the gap between what students currently know and where they have to get in the curriculum. These scaffolds are temporary supports provided as the student are learning as they are learning the new skill. Therefore, scaffolds should be implemented only as needed and with care. The purpose of the scaffold is to allow all students to access that grade level content. Our goal is that students develop the knowledge and skills and language needed to support their own performance in the future. Therefore, scaffolds must be gradually removed as students gain independence and confidence when learning or mastering that new skill. There are many examples of scaffolds that may be appropriate when teaching your curriculum. On this slide, these are some examples. Please take a moment to read through them and also consider other scaffolds that you may use for your grade level or content material. This slide contains a resource guide for scaffolding instruction in both ELA and mathematics. Using the link below, consider how you may go about using these resources to support all students. Consider, what are scaffolds and how can I use these scaffolds with my students? Continuing on the 4 pillars that Carol Tomlinson describes in her differentiation work, we will now discuss adjusting the process. When we differentiate through the process, this means we are modifying the activities that students use to master the content, how students take in and make sense of the content. So in order to do this, you may provide oral or written directions. You may break it into smaller steps or use chunking. You may pre-teach certain skills to students who may struggle. This may include working in pairs or small groups, allowing some students to use manipulatives, extending time, bringing in models or diagrams or drawings, allowing students who speak the same language to translate for one another, or even ELL students composing sentences in their first language if that helps them to reach the learning goal. The use of manipulatives is very common in math. It is also one way to differentiate instruction through the process for students where it may be necessary. Some examples of manipulatives are listed below. Please take a moment to look and read through this list and also consider other manipulatives that may be appropriate for your grade level or content area. As we stated before, the product is defined as the method students use to demonstrate their learning. When we differentiate the product, we are adapting how students show you what they know, understand, and can do. Though they are all practicing the same skills or meeting the same standard, for some students, showing you what they have accomplished or mastered may look different. Some may complete an extension activity while others receive extra practice. Some may explain the concept orally before they actually do it in paper. There could also be responses done electronically, through Schoology, through some email form, creating a PowerPoint or Nearpod. It could be a presentation. So there are multiple ways that students can take the opportunity to show you what they understand, what they can do, and what they know about the concept taught. Differentiating the learning environment is sometimes included as one of the classroom elements associated with differentiated instruction. It refers to the organization and atmosphere of the classroom, Without an effective learning environment with rules, procedures, and respect for others, differentiating the content, the process, and the product might be more difficult to accomplish and may not result in the expected positive outcome. Some ways in which the teacher can differentiate the learning environment include creating places in the room where students can work quietly without distraction, while also providing areas where students can work together, one-on-one support, or developing procedures for students to get help when they are working with other students. Please visit the link below for further information. On this slide, we have a comparison between what would be considered different and what would be considered differentiated. Different would be changing the lesson level of rigor to the extent that we are actually changing the actual standard being taught. Differentiated, depending on how you're differentiating the material, could look several ways. To differentiate the content or the product, you could assign intentional selected problem set problems to specific students. You could differentiate the content by creating a scaffold for the application problem and providing it only to students who need it. You could differentiate the process by providing students with a math task in each of their home languages. You could differentiate the process also by pulling a small group for the concept development and doing that process differently for them. And lastly, you could differentiate the product by allowing students to provide written or verbal exit ticket responses. Please take a moment to consider another example of how it would be different and not necessarily differentiated. Next, we will go into our core instruction. This is the instruction that happens on grade level during the math time scheduled during the day. This would not be considered an AIS period or any type of RTI block. During core instruction, all students should receive instruction using district-aligned standards and curriculum, research-based materials, and research-based instructional practice. The instruction is always on grade level during the core block. During the core or math block, the skills should be taught explicitly, sequentially, and systematically. All students are receiving grade level instruction in order to meet the standards defined by our New York State standards and scope and sequence. Explicit instruction should be used during the core instruction. This includes direct explanation, modeling, guided practice, corrective feedback, and also independent practice. Please take a moment to read these explanations associated with each component listed below. As we know, we have multiple sources of data that are collected on a consistent basis in Buffalo Public Schools. Listed below are some of the data sources we use. These sources of data and others are what should drive our instructional decisions related to or regarding differentiation in our classrooms. Please take a moment to review the list below and consider other ways that we can collect data to inform our decisions that we make with our students each day. Next, we will move into Tier 2 instruction. Tier 2 and Tier 3 will take place outside of the core instructional block. Oftentimes, this is done during RTI or AIS. Our Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions are going to take place mostly during RTI or AIS. In RTI or AIS, students are receiving intervention based on need. We are going to use research-based intervention materials and research-based instructional practices. The intervention should be targeted specifically on student need, and oftentimes this student need is going to include skills and topics which may be below grade level. Tier 3 interventions are very similar to Tier 2. One difference to note is related to the fact that instructional targets, which are based on student areas of need, are oftentimes well below grade level in Tier 3 interventions. As a result, you will see the use of very small group or even one-on-one instruction being used to meet the needs of kids receiving instruction in Tier 3 interventions. As stated multiple times before, data will drive all of our decisions. Screening measures will identify students at risk. Diagnostics will pinpoint the specific areas needed for reinforcement or intervention. And data will ultimately make us informed decisions regarding how to focus instruction. It is often helpful to triangulate data when possible by comparing multiple data sources regarding particular skills or standards. In our district, we have access to multiple data points. So please know that it is always appropriate to pull in more than one source of data when making the decisions regarding instructional needs. You can use data to identify particular skills that need to be reinforced, either prior to starting a module or teaching a lesson, or when you are preparing for an upcoming module or lesson. It is our goal during this presentation that teachers know that differentiation should be occurring during your core block instruction. Differentiation should be also occurring with grade level content and standards in mind. We are providing strategies of differentiation so that students have access to grade level content. RTI or AIS is not interchangeable with differentiation. RTI is a period during the day where it is intended to address gaps in skills based on need and based on data. Please note that RTI and differentiation are not synonymous of one another. They are not one and the same. Although, during the RTI block or AIS block, you may use differentiation to address multiple needs of kids who are all in the same class at one time. Our next few slides will explore our BPS coaching tool for differentiation. This is the 2022-2023 instructional coaching tool for mathematics. Since we are focusing on differentiation in this PD, it is important to know that differentiation is the last topic or area listed on the instructional coaching tool. The bullets below differentiation go through some of the ways differentiated instruction can be used in a classroom. You will see things such as adapting the lesson, using scaffolds, pre-teaching, differentiating activities for groups or learning areas, and using our home languages that the students bring to us in their classrooms as a leverage so that they can connect to the materials being taught. Please take a moment to read through these and consider how you are using differentiation in your classrooms. In addition to the instructional coaching tool, we have a coaching tool look for's document for mathematics. On the furthest column to the left, you will see the indicators. As you move towards the right, you will see possible look fors for both the teacher's perspective and the student. It is important and helpful to familiarize yourself with all of the possibilities of how to differentiate. This will help you to know or ensure that you are differentiating and that anyone walking into your classroom has a common understanding and language for what it may look like in your classroom. Please note that these are not the only ways to differentiate. There are a substantial number of ways to differentiate instruction, and it is oftentimes dependent on the teacher and the student need. This document is 2 pages since it goes through all of the indicators listed on the instructional coaching tool. Take a moment to consider any other ways or possible look fors that you may see or could be seen in your classroom. We also want to take an opportunity to discuss establishing routines in our classrooms so that differentiation can occur. Some of the ways to establish routines for differentiation include progress monitoring, so that we're continually monitoring the growth of our students. Lesson planning, so that we're intentional on our practice when implementing differentiation. Time allocations, so that we are strategic about creating learning areas and also teacher-led small groups, and using the programs that we have to support all that we do. We have spent today going through a common framework for differentiation and what that will look like with our students. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to anyone in the math department for your support. We thank you and hope you have a great year.